Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Dave.
And Evelyn from the camera store.
And today we're talking about the Canon EOS R and its system. Now we've had the camera for about a month now. We've had a really good opportunity to try it out in a bunch of different locations.
Yeah, we even brought it with us to Germany, to Cologne, and we're able to shoot with it around Photokina. We've also tested it around Calgary and a few other places and put it in the hands of some local pros. Now we're gonna meet up with Mike Drew, who you might remember from previous TCSTV episodes. He's actually bought one of the Canon EOS R cameras. So we're gonna give you an overview, talk about some of the pros and cons, and give you guys a really good idea of what this camera system is all about.
Now we've lucked out on a gorgeous day here in Calgary, so let's get to it.
All right, so what do we have here, Dave?
So this is Canon's first full-frame mirrorless camera featuring a 30-megapixel sensor.
Yeah, and the biggest exciting thing is that it's a new lens mount for Canon. They haven't updated their EF lens mount since 1987.
Now I'm old enough to remember that first change.
I'm not, neither is Brendan. 1987.
So it's very exciting because it opens up a bunch of new optical properties that they can take advantage of with this new mount.
Yeah, now the other exciting thing is that they have adapters so that you can actually mount any of your EF or EFS lenses without losing any of the feature sets.
Yeah, so if you're an existing Canon user like I am with a bunch of Canon EF lenses, don't be worried, right? It's very seamless to put the adapter on and put your old lenses on and they work flawlessly.
Yeah,
and if you're a video person...
Yeah, there's even an adapter that has drop-in ND or circular polarizer filters.
It's very, very interesting what they've done with that. They've implemented it incredibly well. Now, let's talk about the lenses.
Yes, so the 50mm lens that we have on it right now is one of the sharpest, fastest lenses that I've seen from Canon. It is absolutely beautiful, and they've added the multi-function control ring on the front of the lens, so you're able to adjust things like your aperture, your ISO, or even your shutter speed right on the lens.
Now, along with this lens, they have their foundation lens they're calling the 24-105, a brand new 35-1.8 that has some macro capabilities, and an incredible 28-70 f2 lens, which is huge, but optically and really impressive.
Yeah,
lens.
They're calling it their paint can lens because it feels like a paint can. It's huge, but it is a really nice lens, a really great option that they've added. I think wedding photographers are going to love that.
So some of the specs on this camera here, it is capable of 8 frames per second.
With some limitations.
It's also capable of 4K video recording.
With a major limitation, it has a 1.83 crop.
So we'll discuss that a bit more later. Let's talk about some of the ergonomics and some things that we're used to and what we're not used to with this camera. The biggest thing you're going to notice when you look at the back of the camera is that we give up the rear control dial that we're so used to if we've been running a 5D3 or a 6D.
Yeah, you also lose the joystick.
And you lose the joystick. We have this new multi-function bar right now. Now the jury's still out on this, and I have to agree, I'm not sold on it, but I'm not.
It's really, really different. Canon obviously put a lot of thought into this. It's a touch bar and it has some different functionality. You can tap one side to say preset your low ISO, tap the other side for high ISO, and then you can swipe to adjust different things like Kelvin color temperature, white balance. You can even set it to change to swipe between your ISO modes or
your focus modes,
whatever you want.
Canon says it's their most customizable camera they've ever made, and I have to agree. Maybe that's what taking an old guy like me a little more time to get used to. Now, on the good side, articulating screen that they've done properly. It flips out to the side like that, which I really like. What do you think of the electronic viewfinder?
Well, the electronic viewfinder is really nice. It's a 3.69 million dot OLED, and it's really bright and beautiful. When you look through it, it looks almost true to what you'd see with an optical viewfinder. What do you think about that?
I've been shooting with optical viewfinders for a long time, and I've been against electronic viewfinders for the longest time. I find them, especially the early generations, were very laggy and really punchy and not really true to life whatsoever. Finally, this last generation of cameras we're seeing with some other manufacturers along with Canon, the viewfinders are gorgeous.
Yeah, the refresh rate's really good.
Refresh rate is good. The colors are much more subtle. I find myself it's much more seamless than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah, and if you want to turn on or off the exposure simulation, you can have it so it's bright all the time. It just depends on your shooting preference.
So the Canon R does not feature IBIS, in-body image stabilization. That's going to set a few people off. Now, 2 of the 4 lenses that they did introduce with this system are stabilized.
Which means that 2 of them are not image stabilized. Not to mention, there are a lot of EF lenses that are non-stabilized that you might want to adapt to the camera. So not having that in-body image stabilization does set this camera back behind some of the others.
Now, speaking of adapted lenses, I know Mike Drew is a huge fan of adapting all kinds of lenses to his EOS R.
That's true. It'll be great to see what he has to say about it. Now, Mike Drew is a professional photographer. He's going to run us through some of the things that he's found with it, adapting lenses, shooting with it in all kinds of situations for photo and video. All right, you guys, we found Mike Drew. We're down at McKinnon Flats, and before we get into it, I want to talk to you guys about how Mike has been shooting Canon since the beginning of his photography career that began in 1978, and he was shooting before EOS even came about. We're just at the 30-year anniversary, and so you were shooting with FD mount before
FD,
then.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, before we even talk about the Canon EOS R, let's talk about your favorite photography accessory. We're standing in front of his 2007 FJ Cruiser from Toyota.
How many kilometers do you have on this so far?
I got 712,000 kilometers on
insane.
this. So
Holy
in
smokes.
US terms, that's around 500,000 miles. Just a
amazing.
little shy.
Wow. So if you guys can beat that, let us know in the comments below. But we're going to get into this and talk to Mike about why he loves the Canon EOS R so much that he bought one.
So you've had some pre-production versions of this camera to play with, and you've actually went out and bought it. You're one of our first customers to actually buy one.
absolutely. Yeah.
So what prompted you to kind of jump on that so quickly?
Well, I wanted a new full frame camera because the two that I have are beaten beyond use.
You're notorious for how you treat your equipment.
I am.
I know you think of them all as museum pieces and should be kept in pristine condition
Yeah.
and never taken outside the box.
Yeah, just like a carpenter's hammer. Yeah, exactly. But I tried out some of the pre-release versions of this, and I really liked what I was getting out of them. They worked perfectly. When it came time to pre-order one, I did without hesitation.
Excellent. So, and it's fit into your workflow perfectly?
Yeah,
So-
perfectly. Actually, one of the best things about it is that it might sound like a silly thing to say, but the files out of this camera are virtually identical to the files out of my other cameras. By saying that, I mean that the color is the same, the look is the same, everything is the same. So I can carry three cameras like I normally do, just go from one to the other, and they all fit together.
Right, it's going to speed up your workflow, right? When you're trying to
yeah,
deliver a project,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So what are the main pros and what the main cons that you're finding with this camera?
Well, the main pro is that, actually, the main pro is that it uses the same batteries as all my other Canon cameras.
Right, and you always have a pocket full of batteries,
Yeah,
right?
well, and the battery life is quite good on it. I was telling you guys the other day, I filled through two 32 gig cards and a third of a third 32 gig cards on less than 2 batteries.
And that's a mixture of stills and video,
Stills
of course,
and
right?
video, yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
So, and what are your thoughts on the one SD card slot?
Slot shaming.
You know me.
Yeah, I know, Dave. No, I don't. For me, it's a non-issue. I was showing you my card before. This thing is so beaten to death. But it's never been an issue for me, and I don't expect it'll be an issue.
So, Mike, what's your take on the electronic viewfinder on this camera?
Well, this is probably the best electronic viewfinder I've used. Not that I'm an expert on electronic viewfinders, but it is pretty spectacular. I put this up to my eye, and it's almost like looking through an optical viewfinder. It's so nice.
So what advantages does the electronic viewfinder have? Is there features that you like about it?
Well, the biggest feature that I like about it is that there's an electronic level that appears inside the viewfinder when you look through. And because I tend to lean a lot,
Right.
Having that in there to be able to see and line up, it's a great help.
So you're using some third-party glass here. This well-loved Sigma 150 to 600.
Yeah, my favorite lens.
How do you find it works with the adapter?
Perfectly. It works exactly as it did before on all my other cameras. It's, in fact, maybe it's a little bit of confirmation bias, but it seems actually that I get sharper pictures.
So I just saw earlier you're shooting some kind of bird.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, what would you say, probably 800 meters away.
Yeah.
And it's a bird just slightly bigger than a pigeon. And against the blue sky, the camera had no problem locking onto it. It is literally a speck in the sky.
That's crazy.
People ask me, have you used the silent shutter mode?
Right.
And
because you're like a outdoor guy, right? So are you
yeah. They say, yeah, it's great if you're shooting wildlife. And I'm like, you know what, if you're close enough to a grizzly that the shutter sound is going to spook it, you're about to turn into grizzly shit. So it's not a factor.
I happen to, I agree, you know, keep your bears at a distance.
So Mike, you've been shooting more and more video probably over the last decade. And I think it's amazing to see your photography skill transitioned over into these amazing little videos. Yeah. You told me something really interesting about 4K, but with that 1.83 crop, that's actually working to your advantage for wildlife videography.
Yeah, it is. The biggest advantage here is that in 1080, you get a 600 mil equivalent view.
Right.
As soon as you flip it into 4K, then from the very same position without changing anything, you're at, what do we figure, around 1100 millimeters?
Yeah.
So that you're getting 80% more, 80% closer, 80% more magnification.
Yeah.
With
the 4K frame.
Yeah, which is, like in the aforementioned grizzly bear, quite an advantage.
And what about all this rolling shutter we keep hearing about?
Rolling shutter. Yeah, you know, there is rolling shutter in this, and really, honestly, I thought there'd be more wobble in a wet t-shirt contest, but it's really not that bad.
Wow, that was such a great day talking to Mike Drew for a real world test of this camera. I mean, he's invested in this system and the EOS system for years, so he's a perfect person to talk to. It's really nice to know that he likes the feel of this camera as well as the menu system.
Yeah, no, as a Canon shooter myself, I can relate to Mike. The menu system is very familiar if you're a Canon user. Now keep in mind, this camera is weather sealed, but only to the same level as the Canon 6D Mark II. Now one very trick feature I love about this camera is that if you are changing lenses in a dusty or dry environment, when you take the lens off, Canon drops the shutter down to protect the sensor from dust and debris. Now this is a feature I think they designed specifically for Mike Drew.
One thing that really surprised me about talking to Mike Drew as a nature photographer who shoots a lot of wildlife and bird photography was that the limited frame rate didn't seem to faze him. This only shoots at 8 frames per second maximum, and that's without continuous tracking or focus confirmation.
Yeah, those numbers are kind of low compared to other cameras in the market. Now Mike is an old school photographer who shot on film. Professionally. So he's been winding film at 1 frame per second maybe at best. So that frame rate doesn't really bother him too much because he's learned techniques and what works for him.
Exactly. Now when Dave and I were shooting this in Germany, we were shooting mostly people on the street as well as some cityscapes and some family stuff back home. And one thing that we noticed is sometimes the autofocusing system didn't give us the most confidence, and I wasn't always sure if it was me or the camera that was having an issue.
Yeah, now I'm a little more familiar with Canon than you are, and I was generally able to get some really good results, but there were times where I questioned myself, was it me or was it the camera?
Yeah, exactly. So we talked to Rob Galbraith, who's another photo expert, and we talked to him about the autofocusing system as well as some of the other important features. We're here back at the camera store with Rob Galbraith,
who is a longtime photojournalist and he used to run one of the most comprehensive review sites online. I really wish you kept that one going, but you've been busy.
RobGalbraith.com. Now, Rob has since moved on to doing freelance photography, and most and foremost, he is a full-time instructor at State Polytechnic teaching photojournalism. So thank you so much for coming in today.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so now we've all been highly anticipating Canon coming out with a serious mirrorless camera, and we were waiting for the Canon EOS R. Now, what are your thoughts on this camera in terms of being a practical tool for the photojournalism students?
Sure. So, in the time that I've had with it so far, I fairly quickly concluded that this is not going to be a camera that we will recommend to students. Ultimately, it seems that at minimum, it's not designed for the kind of photographer that we're training.
What aspect about this camera in particular really stops you from recommending it to photojournalism students?
Number one would be the autofocus system. It seems to be fairly trivial to defeat it, meaning that if you just have someone walking towards the camera, it does seem to track just fine at 5 frames per second or 3 frames per second, but as soon as the movement is a bit more abrupt, in the time that I've had with it, unfortunately, I've been quite easily able to get it to stop focusing when it should be able to continue tracking.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a real problem.
So you're seeing that when it's more irregular movements. I think you and I before we were talking about shooting a wedding. So if people are not moving in that linear line towards you, you're finding that it's missing focus.
Correct. Most real-world shooting, whether you are a wedding photographer or you are a photojournalist shooting some kind of event. Most of the movement is not going to be someone just walking towards you.
Now what about silent shooting mode?
So for now, this camera effectively doesn't offer useful silent shooting. Now I know at the time of the camera's announcement, Canon did make mention of the fact that through an upcoming firmware update, the camera will be able to shoot silently in continuous drive mode. And so there's probably not too much more to say about that until that firmware update is out and you see how it performs.
What do you think Canon has done right about making this camera?
Well, the overall handling seems really nice, and gosh knows the lenses are beautiful, and even things like the attaching of the lens to the body just feels so nice. So
yeah, it's really tight.
Canon has always produced really nicely manufactured products, but it seems like they've upped their game with this one.
Okay, well, thank you so much for giving us your perspective on this. It's really interesting to see what Canon has done with this camera, and hopefully with some firmware updates, they will fix a couple of the issues. Some of them will have to wait probably till the next generation. But yeah, we really appreciate your input.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, when Dave and I first started testing this camera, we were both really mixed on it. I think this is the one camera that neither of us really agreed with each other. And at the beginning, I don't even know if we agreed with ourselves.
Now,
what do you think about it?
Well, I've been shooting Canon pretty much my entire career. And, you know, I liked it when I first picked it up, but it wasn't like a new 5D. Right, where I felt just at home with it. There's a lot of new features and functions to kind of learn, and maybe it's an old dog, new tricks kind of thing, but I see where things are going, and I see the benefit of mirrorless cameras, and I also see that the glass that they're putting on there is so capable of amazing quality and optics that we've never seen before. I think we're going to see this new realm of quality and images. So I personally think these lenses are so good that the EOS R that we're seeing right now is just sort of a good enough camera to kind of get into the market. It's logically placed just below the 5D4, just above the 6D Mark II. I would take this over a 6D Mark II anytime.
Oh yeah.
But 5D Mark IV, I'd be really hesitant. In fact, I'd probably still go with the 5D Mark IV.
Yes, yeah. Now, I think it's really important to note that Canon very strategically positioned this camera between the 5D Mark IV and the EOS 6D Mark II. And I think a lot of that has to do with product line preservation, not only with the DSLRs, but also with their Cinema EOS line. It seemed like they handicapped some of the features, you know, with that 4K crop mode and rolling shutter and a few of the other features that they didn't seem to really nail.
Yeah, no, and as a Canon client myself, you know, I'm a little frustrated. I'm watching a bunch of other brands kind of, you know, make some leaps and bounds into this market, and Canon is kind of holding back, and it gets a little frustrating. This gives us a taste, I think, of what Canon's capable of. It's a very decent camera for sure, but I think it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg of what Canon's going to be capable of.
Yeah, it'll be great to see what their next generations are. And we know that they're capable of producing a good professional mirrorless camera. It just needs to be one step up. And I really hope that they're listening to consumers with just some of the ergonomics of the camera, button placement. You got to bring back that little joystick. I think a lot of people want that. They want the 2 card slots, and they don't really seem to like the multi-control bar. Even Mike said he just disabled it, so right now it's kind of wasted real estate on that camera.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. These are options that are there if you want to make use of them or take advantage of them if that suits your workflow, but you can disable them if you don't want to, because it is an incredibly customizable camera, and of course you can find workarounds to what works for you. Obviously Mike has got a very sort of simplistic way of running his camera, but it works for him. He gets the results he wants.
Exactly. So I think the biggest question is this camera capable of taking good photos and nice video?
Yeah, and I think no doubt it does, right?
Yeah.
And for most people's needs, I think this is a fantastic camera. But if you're more of if you're pushing technology and you're chasing technology and you're a much higher end customer, right, and you're used to certain things, I think you might be a little disappointed with this camera and might be a little, you know, look at the market a little more seriously, some other brands.
Yes, absolutely. So we hope that you enjoyed our review and everybody's viewpoint on this. Let us know what you think of the Canon EOS R by commenting below, and make sure you subscribe if you're new to the channel.
Yeah, follow us on Instagram. You know I like getting the likes.
And we'll catch you guys again soon.